Hey, Jets fans. Welcome to another episode of the Jets Centric podcast. I'm joined by Brady and our good friend Murat Ates of The Athletic. Today, we're going to talk a bit about the end of the season and kind of how we're doing heading into the playoffs. I guess we'll get right into it. Kind of a bit of maybe a poor ending to the season with the long losing streak, followed by a couple of wins. Is there any hope for the Jets going into the playoffs? Any positives to take from the last number of games?
Well, for me, I guess where I lean on with this, if we're looking for positives, is that there's no way that the Jets are as bad as an 0-7 team, nor were they as good as they were at the start of the year, right? I mean, these things happen in hockey, streaks happen, even over the course of those games. Yeah, there were definitely areas to clean up. I think that, obviously defense is an issue, transition is a huge issue, offense is a huge issue, but in terms of the metrics, if you're leading into shot metrics or flow of play metrics or anything like that, they weren't honestly that different. They weren't materially different over that 7-game stretch as a whole, or over the last 10 games as a whole, compared to the rest of the season in a lot of ways. So you might lean on, well, okay, every once in a while in a small sample, that unique events can really skew things. And Connor McDavid is a unique event.
Yeah.
Who I genuinely believe skews shooting percentages so wildly that it's completely reasonable that they took it to Edmonton. Took it to Winnipeg. Probably not the best way to end a story talking about optimism or reasons for hope. But I do think that they are better than 2-9-2 or whatever they ended the season as.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Do you think there's anything to the last few games of Blake Wheeler's play? I know we mentioned, or you mentioned, I think, that he had, I guess, some cracked ribs earlier in the season. I don't know if that ever had a chance to heal or whatnot, but he has looked, I think, a little faster, a little better in his last few games, especially the 4-point night against Vancouver. Do you think there's any possibility of continuing that into the playoffs?
I think so. I do. Bryan, let me tell you, when I felt like the weirdest reporter ever earlier this season, I think it was February. I'd have to check my phone, but I'm in the press box and I'm looking at the bench, and Blake Wheeler is just sitting in a way that looks strange to me. Like, you can't, from that range, you can pretty much see faces, you can see body language, you can see the seat, you know who you're looking at. So I pull out my phone and I'm like, this is going to be a little bit creepy. I stand up and I'm zooming until I'm looking at Blake Wheeler, and he's just hunched over in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I sent that an image and like a 3-second video to some of my closest friends. I'm like, don't tell anybody, I don't want to be weird, but is this guy okay right now? And we were not quite able to put together that, and obviously the Jets were certainly not going to tell us exactly what the situation was. But I think it was accepted by all that he was playing through something. And then it comes out, I think a TSN broadcast mentioned it first. Mm-hmm. Ribs. He was asked after the game, was that Tuesday? Maybe you guys know. These are all blurring into each other. Mm-hmm. And he didn't deny it. And he said that he feels good now. Even last night I asked, hey, it looks like peaking at the right time. Because certainly, mm-hmm. not only the 4 points, but last night, he walked. I think it was John Tavares on the way to the net. There's some speed. There's some physicality. There's a genuinely impactful second line winger, in my opinion, in Blake Wheeler, like a top 6 player right now mm-hmm. that we did not see to start this season. So, mm-hmm. I mean, if you can hand wave it away to that injury, and I think to an extent you can, because he's one of the most intense people. If it's going to be on fire, it will be probably now. Mm-hmm. So I believe it. Is he going to go Kucherov ham? I don't think so, but he's a very good player, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it was never like he was ever, he wasn't a bad player or anything, in the previous season or anything like that. You wouldn't expect him to just completely fall off a cliff like that without any explanation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the topic of injuries, I guess, of course, the big question mark going into the series here would be Nikolai Ehlers. From what I've gathered, it seems like he might not be starting game one, and even if he is, or game two, whenever he does come in, it seems like he might be playing banged up. Of course, you might have a little bit more insight into that. What do you like? I would say expect from that. Do you expect him to be playing game one, game two, maybe sitting out, coming in banged up? What do you think?
I'm not sure what to say with any certainty whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the point where I'm open to either possibility as completely real. I think that there's a high chance that when he does come back, he'll still be in pain. I mean, this is a guy who blocked a shot against St. Louis and then played the rest of that series with a cracked bone in his foot, right? I think he missed one game if I've got this
Mm-hmm.
right. He played. I think that despite what some fans think that this is a soft player because he doesn't score in the playoffs. This guy he's an intense competitor, and I think that he'll come back as soon as it is halfway safe for him to do. Is my guess certainly, and whether that's game one or not, I'm not sure. What kind of dynamism do we get from him? Well, at least he'll still be able to wheel. I mean, his shoulder won't take away from that aspect of his game. I don't know. It's tough to project. The one thing I'll point at is Paul Maurice last night was so fast to say Stastny and Dubois, no issues, they'll play game one, right? And the fact that he's still hedging his bets when he speaks to media about Nick Ehlers, I'm, like I say, open to the idea that he's not there for game one necessarily.
For sure.
For sure. If he does come back, where do you see him slotting into the lineup, you think?
Yeah, for me, I think that it's that second line right wing spot perhaps seems to be the play. It was his once upon a time, and I think that at different times, even the last since he's been hurt, they've used players as a placeholder there with to Matthew Perreault, who I love. I don't think that that's Paul Maurice's ideal version of a second line right wing. I am curious to see if they leave Pierre-Luc Dubois there though, and then perhaps play Ehlers on the left side in that role as well. But I don't think he's interrupting the Connor Scheifele Wheeler top three of them.
Nothing can interrupt that.
For sure.
I guess let's hop over to the defensive side of things here. Of course, there's always that last spot on the third pair that's always been kind of up in the air of who's going to take that slot. I mean, the entire third pair too. From your end of things, obviously you can't predict what the coach is going to do or anything like that. I'm asking you personally, how would you, if you were the coach going into the playoffs here, how would you have your D pair set up?
Oh boy. If I have to accept the timeline that we live in, and this might surprise some, I would not start Ville Heinola. I think it's a shame that he didn't have a chance to play his way through his NHL transition in January, February, or when he was called up and then was able to play just one game over the course of, I think, slightly more than a calendar month. But here and now, I don't feel like I've seen enough to say that I absolutely trust him in those high pressure situations, which is sad because I mean a giveaway at the blue line and a miscommunication that I attribute to Connor Hellebuyck personally behind the net, and only this small sample rush, very good player. Now put that aside, Morrissey DeMello is my go-to top pair. I think it's the best version of Morrissey we've seen. All the with or without you numbers support it, and if you use with or without you numbers, you got to dig into the context of how did DeMello's minutes look with Morrissey? How did they look without? Who did he play with? Who did he play against? You have to sort of, that's what RAPM is really good for as well. But you really want to know your context. And with Morrissey and DeMello, the context is the same. They play against top opposition, and they're the best shot metric version of Josh Morrissey. I think that's a clear-cut top pair. And then, the second pairing gives me pause. Derek Forbort does not look good in the last months. And he has, I guess, some pedigree in the playoffs playing a third pair role for Calgary. I mean, top four with Drew Doughty. There is no peak Drew Doughty on Winnipeg right now.
Right.
Do you put Logan Stanley in that situation? Do you promote him because he's been very good in a third pair? But then you look at the minutes he's played in a third pair, and I did this in a mailbag recently, his top opposition against every Canadian team, and he's played seconds against McDavid, Pettersson, Draisaitl, Matthew. So we have to understand with this impressive season that he's having, it's been as sheltered as it comes. Like, I don't know that I can remember a full season or even a half season of any player being remotely as sheltered as he has been. I think he's been good given that, but do you trust him in a top 4 role? That's a lot to ask. Neil Pionk
Absolutely.
is definitely on the right side. That's no question. And you might even, maybe you can drop some ways where you can put Pionk and Morrissey together and hope. But for me, he anchors that second pairing. I lean Stanley Pullman as the third pairing. So I guess, does that mean that I'm leaving Derek Forbert there? You know what? I think that's what we're going to go with.
Probably,
get a pen and paper, take half an hour and come back to you. I think that's what we're going with right now.
Yeah, I mean, despite Forbert struggling, I guess he and Pionk have still kind of gotten pretty decent results together. Like, they've been more or less even on the shot metrics together. I think Pionk might be carrying a lot of that, but I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you there. I do think it would have been nice to get Heinola a bit more action earlier in the season and see what he would have been like now with the development. Maybe even it would have been nice to see them get Sandberg into some games, possibly, I would have thought, but what's done is done, right? Do you think that Paul Maurice goes back with the Morrissey DeMello pairing, or do you think he puts Pullman back up there?
My guess, I think he has more time for Morrissey DeMello now than he did at the first half of the season. So I'm not saying this to say that it's an absolute no chance that he does it, but the organization rates Tucker Pullman very highly. There's a reason why even in training camp, that was the pairing they went with. There was a reason that it was Pullman was Morrissey's most consistent partner last year, so far this year as well. They see something in him in terms of, I don't know if it's size or speed, that size balance with Morrissey. I'm not sure what it is, but everybody who I've talked to, even passively off the record, they believe in the guy. There's no one telling me that they doubt him whatsoever. I think he's their guy, and the results haven't borne that out. I mean, if he's an offensive player, I think he has 1 assist on the season. Double check that. Like, I love seeing him jump into the play. I love when there's a fourth attacker. I love when the Jets have numbers at the blue line on an offensive zone entry. Like, I think you see them do 2-on-3s or 2-on-2s or 3-on-3s a lot. And one area that has impacted them without Ehlers is that there's no one-man show. They're not outnumbering people at the line. They're not isolating little 2-on-1s because, one, they've spent so much time in their own zone, but two, so few of them jump into the play to add that extra option. Pullman kind of does. It hasn't led to a ton in the way of results, and certainly, in his own end, I don't feel. I think that they believe in him against any opposition with Josh Morrissey, but I don't think that they've had any results. One-on-one, Pullman versus McDavid is one of my least desirable matchups among the Jets.
For sure. Yeah, you're right. 1 assist on the season doesn't exactly spark a lot of confidence offensively. I'm not one of those guys that really looks at points a lot. I'm more of a shot metrics, isolated impacts type of guy. And I know the isolated impact offensively hasn't really necessarily been there. He has seemed to have an okay impact defensively so far. I don't know if that's sort of overestimating him, underestimating Josh Morrissey a little bit. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said regarding Tucker Pullman there. Let's see.
Here, I got one here. So, because we are kind of doing a bit more of a retrospective on the season than really looking forward at the matchup coming up. Obviously, a big news was the PLD and Laine trade. Just curious on your thoughts on. Of course, now we've had a good 40-ish games of Dubois playing here. He has been shuffled around a lot, played with a lot of different groups of forwards. I'm just curious on your insight into him as a player, as well as just kind of a little bit of a hindsight on that trade there.
For sure. I think that any thought of PLD this season needs to acknowledge just the awkwardness of his year, or at least be couched in that a little bit. I mean, the quarantine out of the trade, then being injured so soon after that, missing more time, and then kind of trying to join a team that's in full flight. in midseason form, let's say. Sorry, what I was trying to do there was find a euphemism that acknowledged that the Jets weren't necessarily on fire at the time. I failed. So acknowledging that he's had an awkward transition, you also need to, I think, acknowledge that he hasn't really been an impact player for Winnipeg. That doesn't sour me on the player long term at all. I mean, Patrick Laine had an awkward season in Columbus, and I don't think that he's suddenly incapable of playing hockey. The fits are what they are. And especially with Pierre-Luc Dubois, as soon as the trade was made, I watched 15 games every shift of the guy, and I wrote here's what to expect from him at The Athletic. And one thing that I cautioned against was do not expect him to run people over. This is not a power forward in the traditional sense. He's not going to be trucking people around. I know we've all seen the Toronto Maple Leafs highlights from last summer where, he was absolutely dominant in so many different ways. But his most common, successful skill set is straight line speed, zone entries, and then passes, kind of really nice timing passes, almost that defensemen don't necessarily expect. And he had a lot of success doing that in Columbus, being the high guy in the defensive zone. He was often stretched by the Columbus Blue Jackets in terms of him attacking the neutral zone, and then he would curl along the right wing wall and then look for options from there, which to me sounds like a right wing job that Winnipeg has landed on for him right now, possibly, is actually a really good fit for him right now. I don't expect him to absolutely take over the playoffs just because of he had a good series against Toronto, against Tampa Bay last year. But there is something more to this player than we've seen. Acknowledging he hasn't been dominant or close to dominant, really. Going forward, I still have a long road for him. I love the contract structure. I love that he's an RFA next summer, not this summer. One more year of unrestricted free agency versus Patrick Laine. So there are reasons to think that structurally it will still work out as a good trade, even though it hasn't really moved the needle so far this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has really kind of fizzled out on both ends of the trade. I mean, as far as actual impact this year, I don't think anyone had Roslovic being the guy who had the most impact on either team. But I guess that's how it turned out. You got anything here, Brian?
Yeah. I just want to ask a little bit about the bottom six. And Adam Lowry's contributions and how important he'll be in the playoffs in terms of kind of the shutdown guy. And I would assume he'll probably be playing with Kopp and Appleton again once things start. Just maybe if you could speak about that for a minute.
But it seems most like, Brian, I think you've got it. We experienced a top six Kopp for parts of the season, and that line with Stastny and Ehlers was great. They had some puck luck around the net in terms of rebounds and things like that, but they were also driving the net and things were working out for them. It was a pretty good look, I would say. There's no way he's not landing with Lowry and Appleton. I think that's Paul Maurice's go-to, just like Connor Scheifele-Wheeler is Paul Maurice's go-to. This is the version that has worked during the best times in Winnipeg Jets land, right? Is that you have Kopp as the checking line. It's interesting to me that Perreault has had better results with.
Yeah.
I'd really want to zoom into that before I was sure why that was, but they haven't dominated the way that we remember, I think, sometimes, right? So that will be important. Okay, Adam Lowry, I think, will be one of the most important Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs, not just because he'll probably get a heavy matchup duty, but also, let's rewind. A year ago at this time, the season's over, we're looking back at the regular season. Adam Lowry was disappointing. Adam Lowry was not the two-way stalwart center that we were used to. There wasn't an offensive contribution. There were some injuries. It was 2 years in a row where things weren't looking so good for him. Then he has a monster. That's a Pierre Maguireism that's somewhere in my brain. A monster season or playoffs, or pre-playoffs against Calgary. He looked great. Absolutely, he did. In training camp, he looked great. He was moving fast. He looked strong. He was laying the body. He was holding post-training camp practice, workout sessions with Mason Appleton. They were picking up pucks off the wall. Sort of really cementing himself as a leader, and people were gravitating towards him, I thought, just to watch the practices. And then he goes and he has, one of his best stretches of offensive play of his career. He's hitting. The concussion the injury, I believe that he said that is possible that it might just be neck, and there is some overlapping symptoms there. So I don't want to say what it is if they haven't that personal. That's an issue, but I think he's looked like a very good version of Adam Lowry throughout the season. Like, he's played his greatest hits for us and seems to be dialed into the type of game that will succeed in the playoffs in a way that a lot of Winnipeg's perimeter style players don't necessarily do. So I think that if Winnipeg has success, it will be not just because Adam Lowry checked, but because him or somebody on his line scored something from the slot or from the crease or through something completely crazy.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Of course, and we don't want to dive too deep into the upcoming playoff matchup, because I think we're going to have another episode coming out shortly on it. But of course, we got to touch on it at least a little bit. How do you see the Jets kind of adapting? How do you see Maurice adapting his Jets team to the style of play that the Oilers do like to play? Again, I guess we kind of already touched a little bit on like a Lowry matchup and things like that. But like, how do you expect the Jets to react to what the Oilers bring to the table?
For sure. That's the $1 million question. I think if they had answers, they would not have gotten so thoroughly smoked. But so one little thing that Paul Maurice used to be able to do against the elites of the world is line match so aggressively and so firmly, by which I mean, like, be willing to take a 15-second shift, switch a line on the face-off, et cetera, with the confidence that maybe it was Lowry's line or whoever at the time was going to have success. So let's call it Lowry's line was having success against McDavid. He would chase the matchup, not just so he had Lowry against McDavid, but so that the other coach had to make a decision. Am I happy to run McDavid against Lowry, or do I want to dodge that? And if he dodges that, which used to happen, what happens is that McDavid gets away from the deep pairing that feeds him the puck the best. This is an area of bench management that we don't talk a whole lot about. Winnipeg's very committed. Winnipeg cares which defensive pairing plays behind which forward group. Some of that is because of puck service. And Winnipeg used to believe that it could bump McDavid away from Edmonton's better puck moving defenseman and sort of hem him in his own zone or make life tougher for him that way. It has stopped chasing that kind of behavior because it doesn't work anymore. Like, I don't know it's a thing that works anymore against Connor McDavid. So we're gonna leave that alone. I mean, unless you're gonna play a third forward extremely high in the offensive zone and just pretend that you're not trying to score so that you have better rush coverage. I mean, what are you supposed to do necessarily? I guess defensemen just need to be extra sure that their forwards are coming back if they're going to pinch. Maybe they pinch less often. Those are the sorts of things that McDavid can get in a team's head about, for sure. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the ice, Winnipeg struggled to score lately as well, right? And you hear Paul Maurice talk a lot about the kinds of goals that get scored in the playoffs. I think Edmonton has been great in the neutral zone against Winnipeg. I think Edmonton's been great at collapsing, protecting the middle of the ice against Winnipeg. And traditionally what that leads to is shots from the outside and cycling from the outside. So if Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele can go off and have that like cutback game going and find chances in the middle of the ice, then great, that might still work. If not, what we're going to probably see is a lot of point shots into shin pads or point shots looking for those deflections. And you've seen a lot of that in these last couple of weeks. A lot of offense going for that redirect out of the middle of the ice that starts from the point. And it's why Winnipeg's shot attempt numbers look so good and why their expected goals and other sorts of things where there's a little bit of geography tied in don't look good at all. They're not taking those chances from but maybe a perfectly placed deflection is such a good play that it breaks shot metrics models. I'm not sure. But I think that's what they're banking on.
Yeah. I'm not so much of a believer in doing that. Like, you could get lucky for a bit. It's like, it's possible. I don't think that's necessarily the way to plan it, if that's the way I'm doing things. Just to throw it out there, do you think maybe a more aggressive, maybe a bit more active D and trying to create a bit more of a possession game would be a better way to go against the Oilers? I just feel like if you do that, you're kind of helping your more possession dominant forwards like Lowry or possibly even Dubois, those type of guys. I was just wondering about your thoughts about that.
It's interesting to me. Like, I've asked this question to people in analytics departments, and the answer that I got from one of them that is stuck in my brain is, is people think that if you have those players like the Scheifeleys and Connors in transition, or maybe, Winnipeg has strength at forward. And certainly, if you take out Edmonton's top two guys, Winnipeg is a deeper forward group, right? So the answer they gave me was, you think that Winnipeg win that game 6-5, but you're actually going to lose it 4-1. Like the confidence. Now, they didn't lay out their proof, so I can't step into that with any real intelligence. But there seemed to be a suggestion that the type of game that you have to play to open up and play that pond hockey comes with such risk, and against a team that's going to have one of McDavid or Draisaitl on the ice for 30 whatever minutes of the game, if not more. I'm not sure how they're going to use them necessarily. Seemed to be, the suggestion was that was playing with more fire than it was creating an opportunity. I'm not sure. I have wanted Winnipeg's defense to be more active the entire season. I think that would be a good look for them. At the same time, there have been lots of times during the season where Winnipeg's forwards aren't giving them the requisite help. And, there's a difference between Tucker Pullman jumping into the rush and Dustin Byfuglien jumping into the rush.
Yeah.
So is he there to be there, or is he there and then going to have an impact? So, yeah, hopefully that's not too much of a non-answer. I want to entertain the idea.
Yeah.
Something to think about. We haven't seen it. It would be nice to have a genuine experiment, and Winnipeg has looked good when you get that Morrissey Pionk pairing chasing games. They're more active. They jump up into the play. Sometimes you do get 4-on-2s at the line, or even like that Morrissey Pionk interchange that I think led to a goal a few games ago. Gosh, I keep saying a few games ago, but within the last couple of weeks, there's something there. And then you just think of like the lack of roster talent throughout the rest of that group. And you're like, well, okay, you could try to play that way and you get exposed. Here's the last thing I'll say on the topic. Here's one thing that I've asked coaches at one point before. Do you play different systems depending on who's on the ice, your team and theirs? And most often I've been told no, which seems strange to me. Like, it may be that the answer is to play wildly differently when McDavid and Draisaitl are on the ice in terms of how conservative you are, and wildly more aggressive pond hockey style when they're not. Again, just a thought. I'm not sure.
It's interesting. I have thought about that before, just like, sitting at home. I think, wouldn't it be interesting if when, Scheifele and Wheeler are on the ice, they're playing one sort of way, and when Kopp and Lowry are on the ice, they're sort of playing, a different kind of way. I just thought that would be, I just thought it was an interesting thought,
And
subtle ways that happens, for sure, and subtle ways that happens just as a result of what their skill sets happen.
Yeah.
But in terms of, and maybe there's little adjustment. There are definitely little adjustments, like where they engage in the neutral zone, depending on how fast they are, for example. But in terms of sweeping systemic changes, like we're going to play wildly, people keep denying that to me, and I don't see it. So there's that. Sorry, Brady, I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna agree with you and just be like, yeah, I yearn for the days. I mean, obviously, all of us always think back to the 2017-18 run, and one of the things that I've really missed from the Jets, and I think maybe it's just probably because you don't have the talent on the back end to be able to do it, is the way the defense would play super aggressively at the blue lines. Like like pinches were super common back in the day, whereas I feel like nowadays, actually, Brian, I think you had a couple tweets on this from Jay Fresh talking about these zone exits and zone entries for the Jets, but it seems like they've really in the past few years come off of that style of trying to hold up at the blue lines, and they seem to almost just let people come in on them. I mean, I don't really have a question here. I was just more saying I agree with you, and I would love to see a little bit more, aggressiveness and things like that. And I guess I'll turn this into a question. Do you think that style would be more beneficial, or do you think that maybe because we don't have the personnel we used to, there's a reason why we don't play like that anymore?
A little bit of both comes to mind. Like for me, like if you want to play it scientifically, my answer is like you'd have to see it. You'd have to see a genuine honest run at it to know. But Paul Maurice and Charlie Huddy were faced with this problem at the beginning of last season. Okay, your defense has been gutted. What system in the world could possibly make them look good, right? And as much as we poke and prod at things like that offensive zone pressure or the willingness to pinch, Paul Maurice's decision and Charlie Huddy's decision was they're going to back off the offensive blue line and they're going to reduce those rush chances against, because in 2018, 2019, there were a lot of rush chances against. They didn't like what happened. So they're going to make sure that rushes are reduced. Yes, it comes at the cost of offense because some of those pinches don't get made. Some of those pucks don't get kept in. Their guess is that the trade-off is going to be the most flattering towards the Winnipeg Jets defense. And it's like, okay, I understand that. That's 100% baked into how they played deliberately. So you're right to point that out. And then the question is, okay, if these same players played not wildly, but if they played concertedly, aggressively, and if they were getting that back pressure to justify it, what would happen? And I don't think we know the answer with scientific proof because we haven't seen, Anthony Botetto's name came to my mind first, but we haven't seen the less elite players play that way necessarily. And when we do, they're less dynamic and it may turn into less as well. So I guess for me, it lands on, what's the Winnipeg's areas of strength? It's probably the forwards. So if you have Mark Scheifele, Paul Stastny, Adam Lowry playing the defensive games of their life and busting back hard every single time, and then the winger defense is there as well, then you compensate and you give those defensemen a chance to jump in a little bit more often, even if it's not the game plan to have that dial ratcheted up to 2017, 2018. If you're getting quality defensive play from those top centers, I think the whole thing looks a little bit better. Gosh, that's a monologue, but I also want to end with it. I don't want to make the all-stars' jobs even harder because they contribute so much in the way of offense, and teams win and lose with their stars. But if they were able to add that element to their game, Scheifele in particular, which we've seen spurts of, but I don't think he's dominant, that would make everybody's life a little bit easier.
So basically what we're saying is the biggest thing the Jets could add right now is an elite offensive defenseman, which totally just grow on trees.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You can also lay the body and pick two guys out of scrum.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I had in mind.
Real fix for the friends we lost along the way.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's depressing thinking about what we're missing with that guy right now.
Occasionally, you get a sign of life and you see him fishing on social media. And you just go, "Well, I'm glad he's happy. I'm just happy he's doing well."
Oh, right on. That's good. Yeah, that's right on.
For what I have written down here, the only other thing I really wanted to maybe touch on, I guess this gets a little bit away from the Jets. I just have Cole Perfetti's name written down here. I feel like we should at least mention, of course, he had a great season with the Moose, and now he is going over to compete in the World Championship for Canada. Just curious what you think. Just the that invite and the opportunity to play on Team Canada. Of course, it's not Olympic Team Canada or anything like that. But what do you see that as that? What do you see? How do you see that helping him in his development? Do you see that as a big thing that maybe pushes his confidence up? Do you see him maybe being a guy who could be slotted in as soon as next year? If so, where, kind of thing? What are your thoughts on Cole Perfetti recently?
Yeah, the little lion, the young king.
Yeah.
I think that it's been a pleasure to watch development in real time. I think that has been it for me with Cole Perfetti. That he's not a big guy, he's not a lightning quick guy, that's for sure. And so you wonder, how is he going to translate his strengths and his offense to that next level? And originally, first couple of games with the Moose, first opening stretch for the Moose, not just a couple of games, he looked like a player who was already capable with the man advantage or at 4-on-4 or 3-on-3. When there's time and space, his brain takes over, his hands take over, good things happen. But over the course of like half a season, realistically, like from January to now, from over the last couple of months, really, we've seen the game sort of slow down for him. He looks faster. His brain opens things up quicker. He can play a patient game or an aggressive game. His strengths, the sorts of plays he was able to make in junior, where he gains the zone and then and just outweights. Really, he's watching the defenseman, not just the one in front of him, but the rest of them in the zone as well, and then processing where everybody's going slightly faster than everybody else. Then boom, there's an incisive pass into the middle, and it's all patience and brains. And you wondered if he could do that against men because they're faster. They take away that space faster than junior players did. They hit harder, they position better, all that sort of stuff. And by the end of the season, he's finding those same kinds of plays for the Manitoba Moose. And for me, 18 to 22 is such an important developmental age for me. It's for me, the ultimate goal is find that zone of development where the competition they're playing and the role that they have is the most difficult competition they can still have success against while learning. And I think that the Manitoba Moose and the AHL are that perfect level for Cole Perfetti. Had he been in the NHL immediately, he could have drowned a little bit. Had he been junior, he could have been too good for that. But for him specifically as an elite teenager, I think that it was absolutely ideal for him. And Team Canada, feather in his cap, a nod to the great season he had, another opportunity to prove himself against a high level of competition. You were right to say, like, I mean, the NHL appearances at this is going to be a lot less this year than in regular years. I think a lot of guys are exhausted, they're fatigued. It's been a strange time, right? People wanted to go back and be with their families, but it's still going to be a great opportunity for him. And the end of that monologue is really this. It's like there have been a couple of draft classes over the last several years. 2003 comes to mind. You gotta, like, that's the Getzlaff draft, where teams were finding like top line talent right through the end of the first round. Like there's such a tiny percentage of misses in that 2003 draft. Well, what happened in 2004, 2005 was an NHL lockout, and there were a lot of teenagers and 20-year-olds predominantly, playing in the AHL. And I think that helped those players in a huge way. Cole Perfetti is uniquely lucky, and this year worked out perfectly for him. I could see him making the NHL roster next year in a complementary offensive and power play role. Yeah. I could talk for too long about that player, and then also I was going to start whining about Ville Heinola, but we touched on that earlier.
I mean, you can if you want.
I just think like it is, again, I talked about 18 and 22. You want to play in that zone of proximal development. I don't know if that's a term, but it's in my head, where you're playing often, you're playing a substantial role, and you're playing against competition that you can have success against without it being too easy for you. While the AHL, Ville Heinola was an excellent elite player. I think he would have still had plenty to learn and develop at that level for sure. For me, calling him up not to play him and then to take away his even his AHL playing time. Forget about whether he's going to supplant one of the NHL veterans. The idea that he was practicing but not playing in games, I struggle with that. I think that the Winnipeg Jets may look at that and regret it later, thinking that they were too focused on the individual game in front of them and not on this elite player. And maybe he's so good he'll make me eat my words, and none of us will care about this in a year, right? Like. Right. But that one bugged me a little bit. I don't think that he was handled as well as he could have been.
I wanted to ask, I guess, did you watch a lot of the Moose down the stretch here?
It's funny, down the stretch, it fell off for me, but I think I have 10 games over the course of the season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask what your thoughts on Dylan Sandberg were specifically, because he's a guy who I thought really could have had a chance to make the team out of training camp. Just wondering what you kind of saw from him at the Moose and what you think of him for next season, possibly.
Yeah. I see him as a player that can be on the NHL roster next year. I was I was slow playing him in my mind heading into this season. Like I wrote an article that looked at college defensemen transitioning to the NHL over the last like 20 years or something like that. And lately, I mean, we have some awfully elite ones in the NHL right now, but the overwhelming trend is even the best ones, even the ones that go on to have dominant, excellent top four careers, spend some AHL time, whether it's half a season, whether it's 10 games, whether it's more than one season. And for me, Dylan Sandberg playing in the AHL all year, completely fine. Like I have no complaints. I love that he played a big role. I love that he played well. There wasn't a ton of offensive output in terms of points, but like you say,
Right.
sometimes it's more important to look at where the flow of play is when the player's on the ice. And I think Dylan Sandberg had a lot of success in there. Like I think that he was at home, and like Winnipeg should continue to be excited about him as a prospect. Is my takeaway.
That's awesome.
Sure.
Is there anything else you wanted to add, Brady?
Right now, my list is pretty much covered. Murat's been fantastic and just rolls through each one of them so easily. I've got nothing else really here. I'll be honest.
All right. I think we'll.
Every time you ask me a question, that's why.
Hey, it's perfect. It's perfect. We love to listen. So.
No, it's great. I think we'll wrap it up right away here. Is there anything else you wanted to just add out of nowhere, Murat?
Out of nowhere? It's been a wild year, right? Like I'm sitting traditionally for these, I get wired up. I'd have a coffee. I've just started to sip this one.
Right.
I try to focus on getting pumped up and like energized and all this sort of stuff. But like it's been such an interesting year that just the opportunity to sit here comfortably in my living room and talk comfortably about hockey with you guys and like to have a fan-driven podcast play such a role in the Winnipeg sphere is a good thing, right? Like I don't think that I as a media person or the Jets as a team have to agree with everything you guys say ever.
Oh, yeah. Well, no one's going to agree with.
Like, sorry, another monologue, but I love that you guys exist. It's an important note. So thanks for having me. Thanks for including me when I get to be on.
We certainly enjoy having you. It's a lot of fun, and honestly, I was really looking forward to doing this, and I had a lot of fun. So
it was perfect.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Jets fans, for listening. We'll be back with more, and hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks.
For sure. Have a good one.